William Afton, the man in the yellow rabbit suit, the purple guy. By any name, he is well understood to be the villain of Five Nights at Freddy's. What is less clear, however, is why. What would drive a man who seemingly had it all to commit such violent acts against children? Afton had a family, and he had a thriving business with a partner who seemed just as passionate as he was about animatronics and creating a magical place for kids and grown-ups alike, where fantasy and fun come to life. So what flipped the switch? Or is it even as simple as that? Some have posed that Afton didn't need a reason. He's the bad guy. He's evil. He killed the kids because he wanted to, and he kept killing because he wanted to cheat death. It's as simple as that. But that isn't very satisfying, is it? Why is that? We see this phenomenon play out in real life all the time. We want tragedy to have a meaning. We want to know why someone would choose to do something as permanent as end another person's life. True crime is a genre born from that exact question. Why did they do it? This has caused many to view Afton's story in a very different light. They see crying child's death and say, he must have been heartbroken. They look at the way Henry's grief consumed him in the Silver Eyes novels, causing him to push away people in pursuit of a goal that ultimately he realized he couldn't achieve. Death is forever, a lesson William could never seem to learn. It would not be far-fetched then to say William was also consumed by grief, which is why he began creating robots of his own, searching for a way to bring his son back. He learns about Remnant and the ability to fuse a soul with metal and create new life. He builds the fun times which cause him to lose another child, his daughter, Elizabeth. William loses his humanity as he dives deeper into his work. He doesn't even consider the parents of these children as he cuts their lives so short. They would do the same if it meant they could bring back their lost loved ones. William's descent into madness is brought on by the tragedy of losing his children, and similarly to Henry, his grief is so heavy that he neglects his only living child, Michael. This telling of events and similar ones, depending on how you order things, paint William Afton as what some might call a sympathetic villain. A sympathetic villain is someone who, though they have committed terrible acts, is somehow understandable or relatable to the audience. This is a point of contention within the Five Nights at Freddy's fandom because William is de facto a serial child murderer. Of course, anyone would be upset at any attempt to humanize someone so awful. It is important to remember that generally when people are characterizing William Afton this way, they are not doing so to justify or minimize his actions, nor are they condoning them. But even when this is stated in full, people are still upset. I myself am one of those people. Not pitchfork in hand upset. I often find myself more in the confused camp. And it's not the first time I've found myself in this position. Wandavision and Multiverse of Madness are two Marvel properties, a television show and movie respectively, that tell a story from the comic books about Wanda Maximoff, aka Scarlet Witch. Within the show and the movie, we see Wanda torture people, including an entire town, forcing them to live out her own idyllic life, wherein she gives birth to twin boys. Despite the fact that this all feels very real, it is Wanda's own power creating the illusion and puppeting the townsfolk, all to shield herself from the reality of losing the love of her life in a very gruesome manner. I won't go into all of it to be brief, but once this spell is broken, her children are gone. They were never real, and never hers, but she feels the loss just as deeply as if they had been. From there, she goes on to commit multiple acts of violence, killing countless people just to get to a world where she can be with her children. When I watched the show, I was appalled at her behavior. I could empathize with her pain, but the show was painting her as a sympathetic character to the point where she faced no repercussions for her actions. I was baffled by the online reception to Wandavision as an inspirational story of a powerful woman doing anything to keep her family together. It seemed wrong. A town of people faced potentially irreversible psychological damage due to her choices that she was actively making every passing day. Other people's children were suffering at her hands, all because she wasn't ready to let go. I couldn't understand how, even keeping in mind all of her story arc up to that point, the audience would be able to empathize with her actions. Multiverse of Madness really solidifies her as a sympathetic villain, and by the end of it all, I would agree that by the conclusion of her story, it makes sense to label her that way. But back to the matter at hand. Now that I am no longer a casual viewer of FNAF, but someone who dedicates a fair bit of my free time to the franchise, I've begun to see more of this discourse about Afton and his motivations. Here's the thing, I do believe they are important, and I think if Afton fit the bill of a sympathetic villain, I wouldn't be disappointed. But personally, I have a gripe with this reading of the situation. I just don't think there's anything sympathetic about William Afton. I think people see a man lose his children and imagine how awful that must be. We even have an in-universe reference point with Henry. Now that Tales from the Pizzaplex has given us Edwin, I'd say that's two great examples of some morally gray behavior being brought on by the sudden and tragic loss of a child. But William Afton is decidedly not Henry or Edwin. Both characters, when their children are alive, are doting fathers. They are absorbed in their work, certainly, but they recognize their children's need for attention and connection, and they do their best to provide in the ways they know how. To say they are shining examples of parenting would be a stretch, but they are given characteristics that show their love for their children, that make the anguish they feel after losing that child believable. They feel guilt and shame over it that they struggle to overcome. William, in all his iterations, is never shown interacting with his children in a positive way. The closest example we get is him telling his daughter Elizabeth not to go near Circus Baby. And it's worth making note that even though Scott hired a voice actor for William Afton for Sister Location, we never hear how he speaks to his daughter in these moments. The only instance of him speaking about his children in the games is up for debate, but if you believe the orange man in this cutscene from Pizzeria Simulator is Afton, which is likely but not confirmed, he speaks about his child with disdain and frustration. All throughout the FNAF 4 cutscenes, he neglects his children entirely. Even when he is at the pizzeria with them, he doesn't acknowledge them. Even during his own child's birthday party, whose death is meant to be the catalyst for his descent, and as that child cries out in fear, he is nowhere to be found. Moving away from the games, nothing about the books paints William to be a warm person. He's depicted in the novels as not only neglectful to Elizabeth, but physically abusive to her as well. Even after she's killed by the animatronic she idolized, William does not soften at the loss of her. We do not see him grieve, and he treats Circus Baby just as poorly. Circus Baby is just a vessel for Remnant, and a devoted follower who is helping him with his experiments. And whether it's the games, books, or the movies, William treats his living children as tools at best and obstacles at worst. Michael is tasked potentially with cleaning up after William, but definitely with putting Circus Baby back together, just as his father asked. His reward? Getting scooped, being injected with Remnant and having his body filled with animatronic parts. And when Innard abandons his body, Mike is left confused and alone, slowly rotting, but never dying, immortal and restless. And regarding Vanessa, Whether you believe she's human or not, she's the closest thing to a living child William Afton has in the film, and he treats her no better than the others. She's made to carry out any task her father places before her, no matter how grim. And whatever hold he has on her, it's clear she fears for her life. It is no surprise then that when she finally stands up to him, he doesn't hesitate to dispose of her. I believe there is more than enough evidence to say that William Afton is not motivated by a desire to reunite with his lost loved ones or recreate some beautiful family. I don't think he even wants to play pretend the way Henry seems to do in the novels with his young Charlie. No, Afton never really appreciated a single thing he ever had. Not when he had it, and certainly not when he lost it. Afton's eyes only see what others have, and he views things and other people through the lens of what they can do for him. He needs to be in control of his environment, and everything around him should be at his disposal. But that still leaves the question: what motivates William Afton? Well, here's what I think. He became enthralled with Henry's creations. Jealous, even. Perhaps they made him feel inferior, as they were better than anything Afton had ever been able to create. So he studied Henry, the resentment and the obsession growing inside him. Even as they became partners and their business was a success, it wasn't enough. He wanted the animatronics to be his own. He deserved them. He built the business. He shouldn't have to share the success with Henry. But he knew he needed Henry, and that was infuriating to him. Maybe this is what caused him to lash out against Henry's daughter that night. If viewed this way, it doesn't really matter whose child died first. William could have been evening the score, certainly, but maybe he just wanted to take something from Henry. William needed to feel in control, and for Henry to be vulnerable, just to prove it could all be taken away from him if William really wanted to. And he did. What William wasn't expecting was that the security puppet assigned to Charlie's bracelet would do exactly as it was programmed to do. It found Charlie, and as she died, her soul fused to it. Upon discovering this, it would set William on a new path. He needed to understand why this would happen, and how. Not because he was desperate to see his son again, but because he needed to be able to harness this ability, to control it. His son, lying in a coma, would be brought back by his hands, and he'd have the power to do something Henry never could. However he came to the conclusion, he decided he'd need to kill again. And he did, stuffing the bodies into the animatronic suits to see if they too would become possessed. Besides, who was going to go looking for missing children in the suits? From here, he learned about what he would call Remnant and conducted a particularly gruesome experiment. What if a person died inside of a Springlock suit? The result was something more powerful, but it was less predictable and obedient than the others had been. But he did learn a valuable lesson about Springlocks. He created the fun times to keep collecting and experimenting with Remnant. He used electric shocks to keep them obedient. And when he was no longer able, he enlisted his son Michael to continue his work. Now, the exact timeline of all these events is fuzzy, as is the way with Five Nights at Freddy's. But these motivations track with what information we have about William Afton. Far more than the idea of a grief-stricken father. If something happened to William to make him an insecure, jealous man whose morality was shaped only by his own selfish desires, it happens before the events of Fnaf as we know it. And I don't think that's unsatisfying. I think it's a reminder of what we become when we reject humanity, when our insecurities turn to jealousy, when we refuse to accept that some things are out of our control and allow fear to become hatred. While we can point to Henry and Edwin's rage against their respective machines, we also see the other side of them. We are given windows into their hearts, and that is where their redeemable qualities shine through. The thing that makes you feel conflicted about how to react as they pour their agony into their creations, as Edwin spits on his own invention that was only doing exactly as it was programmed. You connect with the human side of these men, and while you know what they're doing is wrong, you understand. We never see this soft side of William, and personally, I believe that's because it isn't there. We want to see every heart as redeemable. That's why shows like The Good Place and Has Been Hotel were made, because humans want to feel like people are good, even if the goodness is buried very deep down. Or they were good, and the world stole it away from them somehow. But who we are is also our choices. And William Afton's were not the choices of a man acting out of love or grief. That is why he's not a sympathetic villain. That is why it gets under people's skin when his actions are explained by those emotions, because he's never been shown expressing them. If Afton is trying to rebuild his children, he is doing so to create loyal and obedient versions of them to do his bidding, to make sure his work can continue and that he can always come back.
You will do as I say. You will bring me what I want, and if you fail me, then you will, both of you, burn!
I can't say for sure that I believe this was the story Steel Wool intended to tell with Burn Trap, that Vanessa and Gregory were the Afton children reborn as robots and tasked with slowly replacing William's body with animatronic parts injected with Remnant. But I am saying that we have multiple instances of this sort of thing happening across all of the book series, and the Steel Wool games have felt more connected to the books than many others, especially Security Breach and Ruin, in my opinion. That being said, this video is first and foremost about Afton's motivations, and why I believe attempting to give him sympathetic motivations isn't necessary for solving the lore, nor do I believe it is in line with his character. William Afton isn't a monster because the world made him that way. He's a monster because he chose it for himself. He wanted to be a monster because, to him, it had felt better than being a man ever had. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you feel like supporting the channel financially, I do offer $1 memberships for those who want some extra behind-the-scenes pictures and posts about my upcoming uploads, as well as shoutouts in all of my videos. I upload every Friday and plan to talk more about the novels and Cassidy in the near future. Thank you so much to my Sparks, SW Big Fan 1, Sejo, Susanna Murphine, and Alexis, as well as to all of you who made it to the end of the video. I'll be back next week, but if you can't wait, there are videos on the screen right now just for you. Okay, bye! I'm so upset. Okay.